Cool. All right. So I would say like this is a good start to say, having an env file. I would go one step further. This was sort of one of the questions that somebody asked in an office hour. I would also try to create like an env.template file, which would be checked into your source code. So that way users can like use that and look at like, it will also indicate what are the different values in my env file that are expected. Because right now it says that you just need this one thing, but in the future, if things just keep, getting added, then this would be like this would get a little unwieldy.
Okay.
So cool. So let's start by looking at your server file. So gotcha. So you're using .env, body parser, cookie parser, express. So one thing to always keep in mind when you're looking at your server file is that the server file shouldn't be doing a lot of logic, right? So it should just be initializing things. So, all of these things are mostly initializations, right? Like we're setting the view engine, we're requiring like the different things we need. So using some stuff, some middlewares. This feels like this is a definition of a middleware function, and this could potentially live in a separate file. The fact that something is defined here is a smell. So I don't know what this is doing. So response.locals.query, you're resetting it because of some sort of view thing. Doug or Danielle?
We don't fully recall.
Yeah, neither one of us remember making that, so I'm wondering if it's part of the starter code.
Gotcha. Okay. Okay. So I guess I could talk about how we can move this into a different file a bit later. So, okay, let's ignore that for now. We're using logger dev. Mute. I think.
Whoops.
Thank you. Right, so we have some more initialization happening. So this is really cool. So I like the fact that there's no explicit like information about what the routes are in this file. It's just saying that, oh, I have some routes and I'm initializing it. If I want to know more about it, I need to go inside this file. So that's kind of a good practice, to not leak the implementation details into this file. All of this is just like, it's just delegating to like the different functions, you could say. So cool. So let's go to the routes file. So there's in source, server, routes, and then index. All right. So here we are requiring a bunch of routes. We're requiring this model here too. So this is a definition of a middleware function. And at this point, I would say, okay, since we have these two floating middlewares, there was one middleware in the other file, and then there's one middleware in this file, it would make sense to create a separate file just to keep your floating middleware functions. Like there's no, like is logged in is a middleware function for authentication, and this file is an index file. So there's no real reason why this function should live in this file, or rather the definition of this function should live in this file. It feels like a wrong place for this function. So instead, what I would recommend is in my server, just like I have a utils, I would create a new file called middlewares.js, and then move this function into that, as well as the other middleware function, and maybe name that function. What was the file? It was in server. Source server.js. So yeah, so another thing is that this is an unnamed function, right? So I have to like look at the function to see exactly what it's doing. Instead, if this was just a named function, so it was something like app.use middlewares reset response locals, that function name would be a lot more indicative of what it's doing. rather than me having to like look at the implementation and be like, oh yeah, it's resetting some sort of response locals. So having good function names and combining that with organizing really adds like documentation to your code. So going back, yeah, we were here. So this could move, and then we have some routes here. So we have a home route, and we have a users route, and then are these the routes which are sort of above the authentication? So these are the routes
Yes.
for like signing up and signing in.
Yes, they are.
Gotcha. Okay, so so what is inside the users route? Let's take a look. So we have the login, post login, and then we have sign up. Gotcha. So I wonder if I'm just thinking if users is the right name for this file, because it is in fact doing sign in and sign out, but it isn't really doing anything user specific. It's more like it's session specific, or I guess login is user specific because it's creating a user. Oh, actually, no, it's not even creating a user. Sign up is creating a user, right? Yeah, here you go. So I wonder if it would be more useful to call this file sessions.js, because it's just like, organizing your sessions. And then users.js would be more about like, if I want to like update my user, my email or password and all these other sort of functions.
Okay.
Yeah, so let's go back here. All right, so we have user routes, and then we have, what is this? So this is a GET request, and then, so why is this a floating route here, specifically for a contact? And why is it not inside here? Oh, I see, because you wanted your home route. Okay. Gotcha. Okay. So I think this kind of is also a smell, because yeah, I can't think of a good solution at this point of how we could sort of extract this and put it in a different function, or sorry, a different file. I have to think about that. I'll come back to that. Gotcha. Okay. Thank you, Soumya. Yeah, so I would I want this file to be clean. Like I don't want this file to, again, so because this is an index file, these should just like sort of instantiate these other routes that exist. And by these other routes, I mean like these other files, right? All of these routes are in these different files. So this file should just be like, oh, I want these middlewares to be initialized. I want these files to be initialized. They shouldn't sort of contain these floating, I would say like disorganized or unorganized rather routes. So I can't think of a good thing right now, but I would get back to you to answer that question. Okay, so let's look at users. So in users, we're using bcrypt. So I feel that this should not belong here, because bcrypt is an implementation detail of how we are encrypting our passwords, and this shouldn't be leaked to the routes. The routes shouldn't know anything about it. That is more of like, that's more of a responsibility of the model, right? So the model, it's like how my data is actually stored. So the fact that you're maybe calling bcrypt.compare here should not belong here, because the route doesn't care whether you use bcrypt or some other encryption technology. Instead, what you could do is create a function inside of your user's model, which is compare password, and that requires bcrypt, and that does all of the bcrypt stuff. And this would just, so it's kind of an abstraction over your encryption. Does that make sense?
Yes.
The same thing with this too. Like, so the fact that you're generating a hash and all of that is just like leaking the implementation details of your encryption strategy. That doesn't need to be leaked to the routes. So this, you could have another function called user.generate password, and it would just like give you a password.
Okay.
Cool. So that was like these two lines. What is message doing here? Let's see. So is this some sort of so why is this global? Any reason it being global?
Because it's being used in both, well, all, nope, just the get and the post routes for login.
Right. Yeah, but I don't think it's a good idea to keep things global. I would recommend to move this inside of this, even
Okay.
though you're using it in two different routes. They're still local to each of the functions, right? There's no reason that they should be shared across different routes.
Okay, noted.
Cool. So let's see. So the login is easy. It's just checking to see if there's a user on the session. Otherwise, we redirect. Otherwise, okay. And then when we create and log in, we get the username and password. We try to find a username. If there is a user, then we create a message and then we log in. So ideally what you can potentially do is inline this. You don't even need this variable. You can just inline this message right here. So you could just be like a response.render login and message is the message.
Okay.
And same thing here too. So that way you can get rid of this variable completely. So if we do that, we render the message with the login. Otherwise, so this would be the updated thing where we would have it in the user. So it would be like user.is_valid password, and it would do some things. And then we get back a true or false. So instead of doing is triple equal to false, you can just say if not comparison result. That's more idiomatic.
I remember while we were thinking about that, and then I was worried that perhaps comparison result would sometime be undefined or some other falsy value, which not comparison result would catch. And we were specifically wondering if it's false.
So not of any falsy value is always true. Oh, so I see. You're saying that this is undefined, then you want something else to happen. So that should never happen, right? Because if you write your bcrypt compare, if your previous function is taking care of that, then this would never happen, right? So if your bcrypt is always returning a boolean, or your function called user.isValidPassword, if that's always returning a boolean, and that's the contract that you're creating for that function always returns a boolean value. So that way you don't have to be always defensive. So you're creating a defense structure right in the beginning, so that way your functions downstream don't have to constantly be worried about whether it's a truthy or falsy value. They can be sure that it's always truthy or falsy. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And everybody else, feel free to like interrupt me if something doesn't make sense, even though I'm just going through like Danny and Doug's code.
I guess I wonder how we can be certain that the function is only going to return a boolean.
That depends on you, right? So if I say return, okay, so let's see, let's go to my terminal. Can everyone see my terminal?
Yes.
Okay, so if I say 1 equal to 2, it's always going to be the equality operator always. So if I return this, it's always going to be Boolean. So if this is X and this is Y, it's always going to be a Boolean value. right? So let's assume that my function, this function was doing something like that, where it's returning x equal to y. Then I can be certain that when I resolve it, this comparison result is a Boolean.
Even if the values put into the function are bad values for some reason?
Right, because the final return statement, right, you also have to check, sure, you're saying that if somewhere before this, there's some operation which throws an error. Is that what you're saying? If there's an error thrown?
I guess so, or maybe if we ended up with like undefined triple equals y or something like that.
Well,
I haven't thought this through super well.
So always think of at what point you're calling the return, you're using the return keyword, because that's the exact thing that is going to be returned. So if your function reaches this point where you're actually returning x equal to y, then you can be sure that it's going to be a Boolean. But if it returns somewhere beforehand and that does something completely different, and that returns, let's say, a string or something, then you can be, then you're right that it's then you have to check for things. But that's up to you, right? Like when you're writing a function, you always ensure that it doesn't return anything other than what you intended to return.
Okay, I think I get it. I'll want to look through the code a bit. Thanks.
Okay. Cool. So we do that, and then we redirect. And then we are also setting this. So that's good. Does everyone understand what this is doing? I will take silence as a yes. Cool. All right, so when we're creating a new user, we're getting the username and password from the request body, getting the hash password. What is this thing doing? Hash. You don't really need this block, because you're assigning the value which is resolved and setting it to a variable and then returning the variable. Right? It's kind of like a no operation in essence.
Okay.
So what you can do is you get to directly say that .then newly hash password and use the newly hash password to create your user. You can just call this hash password and then get rid of, or you can actually just get rid of this part, this whole thing.
Okay.
And of course, you're going to move this into its own, into like the user.
Yep.
Okay, so cool. We create a user and then we redirect. Otherwise, we catch the thing and then we throw some warnings. Okay, cool. This looks good. Let's go to contacts. Actually, before that, let's look at the model for users. Cool. So now, nice. There is an empty function here, which was the original intention of what I was saying before. Okay, so we have some functions being delegated here, right? So if people attended my talk before, this is sort of the pattern I was saying, that you would just have a DB file and it would contain all of the actual SQL queries, and then you would just have a model file that delegates to that, but this would be the source of, this would be the file that everybody else requires to actually manipulate the data. That's cool. So this would, this is a function that you would like use in the routes file too. Okay. So I want to look at authentication because I noticed that you were using authorization. So I was in contacts, right? So you're using some sort of authorization here, authorization roles. And So there's a can user access. Yeah, so I could potentially just inline this. So I could just like put can user access request user create contact in your if statement, just because there's no need to capture it in a variable if it's just being used once in the whole function.
Okay.
Cool. So let's look at the authorization function. So that was where 3 levels down on authorization. Oh. So I would recommend putting authorization into source because everything is inside the source folder.
Alrighty, we weren't sure.
Okay, so we have a couple of roles. We have some actions. All actions. So if it's a valid role, so we're checking to see if the role. Gotcha. So we're getting the role we're passing the whole user in. Okay. Cool. Else list of roles with permissions. Gotcha. Okay, this looks fine to me. So we use these things everywhere. Sorry, these things. Okay, so did you want anything specific you wanted to get code reviewed on, or was this good?
I had one specific question. In the server.js, we have to require, you've told us to put our view files in multiple folders. What is the best way to select them?
What is the best way to select them?
Yes, because if you just put dir name slash and then plus slash views, it only requires the or it only sees the files that are directly under views.
You're saying when you're setting the view engine, this thing?
Yes.
I think you can. Yeah, this seems weird. You shouldn't be specifying every. I think you can say a /star, right?
Oh.
Have you tried that?
I don't think /star is in the docs, so it might work. But
yeah, so I think
says it can just be a single string or an array.
Right, and the single string. Oh, it doesn't talk about the star at all.
No, I didn't see that.
Gotcha. I'm definitely sure that you can put it in a single operation. So what this is express docs?
I believe so.
View. What was it? App.use view engine? Yeah. View engine.
.views.
.views. Oh, .use. Set views. App.set. So how do I find it? App.use. A directory, an array of directories. If an array, the views are looked up in the order that they occur. Gotcha.
We just tried star. It doesn't seem to work.
Okay. Okay, let me get back to you on this.
Okay, thank you.
Cool. So anything else you want me to focus on?
No, you covered our stuff pretty good, I thought.
Gotcha. Okay, so let's spin somebody else.
We do have one quick question.
Sure.
So I know you said that with Postgres, table names should be singular. For some reason, when we tried to make a table called user, we got an error, but as soon as we changed it to users, it was fine.
Right, because user is a reserved keyword in Postgres.
Okay, so we just, in that case, users is the thing to do.
We changed our name to member.
Yeah, you got to be a little creative. I don't think users is okay because that's like breaking the convention. Because then you would just have one table with a plural name and then the other tables with a singular name.
Okay, thanks.
Cool. Okay. Is this good? Like, can I move on to a different project?
Yes, thank you very much.
All right. So, time for new spin. All right. Is Optimal 7 on the call? Ryan, right?
He's figuring out how to unmute.
Oh, okay. Cool. So just Ryan, if you can hear me, can you send me the link to your project, please? You can send it on the Zoom chat if that's okay. All right, Bookie. Is that like a betting thing? Where we turn paper into cold hard cash. Nice. All right, so this is a simple bookstore app. And there's some skills. So this is the specifications. Yeah, so one thing I would do, Ryan, is to add some instructions in here to, initialize my app and add some sort of instructions on what to do to get a new dev setup. Like every README should have that. Okay, so let's see. Just look at package.json. So we have some scripts in here to reset the DB, to load the schema. Gotcha. Okay. Cool. So let's look at source and look at index. So we have body parser, we have routes, setting the views, using method override. Gotcha, and using routes. Okay. Let's go to routes. Okay. All right, so this seems weird, the fact that you're redirecting to 1. I'm not sure why that's the case. So Ryan, are you unable to, is your mic not working? Or did you just want to, because if I have to ask you a question, how would I get an answer back? Could you just send me a text message or a chat message? Okay. Cool. How would this work? So do you think it would be useful to sit with somebody else who has the mic working? Because I think it would be kind of slow to do this way.
Okay, hold on. Yeah, there we go.
Okay, awesome. Cool. So yeah, so I'm not sure what this is, but I would imagine that this is just like some sort of a test route. Brian, you there?
Unmute. Oh, there we go. So what is I needed some way to paginate it. So if you look a little further down the roots, it might make a little bit more sense.
No, I was just curious about this line here. So this line is for pagination.
What? Remember to mute. Okay.
Oh, I see what you mean. So the one is like the first page. Gotcha. This thing here. Okay. Okay. So from just like the, looking at this file, like I feel like this file could be split into multiple files because there's like all kinds of things going on here. You're rendering the admin page. There's a search page. There's like some book pages. So you can split this into different files based on the kinds of routes they are. So if you're looking at a specific book, it feels like it belongs into a books file. So you would have like a route/books.js. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
And then potentially even your search could go there because I feel like you're searching for books. So it's fine to move that in there too. And what is your admin here? Is it like something that only an admin can do?
It's the interface for adding a book.
Gotcha. But the fact that but there's actually no authorization, or is there authorization too?
Authorization wasn't in the spec, so I was more stuck on trying to get the pagination to work because I had never had to apply that solution. So that hung me up a little bit longer than it probably should have.
Gotcha. So instead of just like looking at the /admin route, it doesn't really reveal that it's a place for me to add new book, right? So instead, what you can do is you can just call it /book/new.
Right.
Right. Like so, because even if you were to add authorization later, the route could still be the same. It could just be protected behind authentication and authorization. And the route URL gives you an indication of what the page is about, right? It makes your app a little bit more discoverable. Cool. So okay, so let's look at this a little bit more. So let's see. Yeah, I would remove these like stale console logs in there too. Okay, so you have DB books, and you have a query which is search for book, and it returns some stuff. It's doing some sort of mathy stuff. It's taking the top 10 books. Gotcha. So if you want to limit the number of, so is this something like I only want to get the first 10 books?
The spec said that it needed to have, it needed to only show 10 things whenever there's a list of stuff. It needs to only show the first 10 and then paginate the rest of the results. So that's sort of how that works.
Gotcha. So I don't see where the pagination is happening.
When let's see here. When it passes that in, it will actually create links in the pagination for page 2, 3, 4, 5, as many as necessary programmatically at the top of the page.
So you mean to say something like this?
Yep, exactly like that.
Yeah, so you see that there's like, I feel like there's duplication of code here. Like this function is this is almost doing something similar to what this is doing.
Right.
Whereas this is a case where you're on the first page, and this is the case where you're not on you're on the remaining pages, right? So what you can do is you can potentially combine these two into a single function, and also when you're doing pagination, you can do all of that in Postgres. That doesn't need to happen you don't have to do it programmatically.
Interesting.
So has everyone heard of this thing called offset? So has everyone used limit before?
Yes.
Okay, so if you
I have
haven't
not.
if you haven't used limit before, it's a way for you to limit the number of rows that Postgres eventually returns. So let's say I do a select star from books, right? And my books, there are like 100 rows in my books, but I'm only interested in the top 10. I could say select star from books, and then I could put in a limit 10, and that would only give me the top 10 rows from all of the results.
Oh, you need to make sure that you also use order by when you're doing that, so that the next time you'll get a consistent next group.
Right. So you can combine limit with offset, which basically means at what point do I start my counting, right? So if I want to limit them only by the 10 results, if I don't provide an offset, the offset is 0. So that means it would start counting from the 0th row. So there would be like 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and I would get like 10 rows, right? But if I provide an offset of 10, then it would start counting from the 10th row. So it's kind of like paginating, right? You're just like, oh, I want to like get the first 10 results, and then the next 10 results, and then the next 10 results. So I can do that from Postgres itself. I don't have to do that programmatically, because doing it programmatically is actually very expensive, because you have to get all of the results and then filter them or like slice them, and that is waste of time, because I didn't have to return all of the results in the first place. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense to me, but wouldn't there be a way to just simply, when you do a search, cache the entirety of the query and then sort of parse through it as needed? Like,
so what do you mean by, so who is doing the caching? Is it you who's going to do the caching, or are you asking Postgres to do the caching?
shoot, I'm guessing Postgres do
Yeah,
the
I mean,
caching. Don't think.
caching is a hard problem, and there's some trade-offs which come with caching, right? So if I cache some results, that would mean that when things get updated, I would get like a stale view of them, right? So there's some trade-offs that happen with caching. So I wouldn't necessarily say that caching is a solution to like being slow. It comes with trade-offs. So in this situation, when you're doing pagination, then I would recommend using limit and offset, because that's just like makes your code much simpler. So all of the code that you had, like all of the stuff where you're computing the last and first, kind of go away, because you just have to provide the offset based on the page. So if you're on the third page, I would give an offset of 30, or 20. If I'm on the fourth page, I would give an offset of 30. If I'm on the 10th page, I would give an offset of 90. If I want 10 results per page. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
So for folks, if anybody can interrupt me if that didn't make sense, and I can go over that again. So if you want to look at an example, sorry, Jonathan, you were going to say something?
I was just going to re-mention that you have to order the results in some way before you use limit and offset.
Right. Always order them probably by created at or something, so that it's consistent. Yeah, so if you look at an example, offset example. Same thing, doesn't give me an example. Right. So it's basically this. So you just provide like the limit and offset after your SQL query. And as Jonathan was saying, you'd probably want to order by, so that way you're consistently getting back the same values, because like you don't want Postgres to return different values and then the order changes and then your first 10 rows change on every time you execute the query. So that's a good observation. So the other piece of feedback that I would give here is, so a comment, sorry, I ignored your question. So the question was, would next need to be called? Let's see. So it depends on what next is doing. Yeah. So what is, yeah, I don't think you need next here if you are calling response.render. So Ryan, what is next doing down the line here? Is there some sort of middleware function that you have down there?
I'm not entirely sure. I think it was because I had used that in a previous implementation of search. So I figured it didn't do any harm to leave it in, so why not?
Gotcha. Okay, so this is probably not needed.
Sounds right. Yeah, I'll try taking it out and see what happens.
Okay. Cool. So what is the difference? So what is the difference between search? I guess you have pagination for the search results as well as pagination for your home page. Is that what this one is for?
That's correct, yeah.
Gotcha. So then you can use, so you would do the same refactoring where you would just use limit and offset even in this case. And then you don't need to have this, because what you can do is you can continue to have this. Yeah, you can continue to have this, and if, I mean, you can probably name this function and share the function between both these routes. And when your page is undefined, you can set your page to be 1 by default, instead of having this redirect happening. Does that make sense?
Total sense, yeah.
Okay. So the post, so this one you were saying was to create a new book. Gotcha. So you say request.body. So one piece of feedback that I can give for this is, so what's happening now is that your request.body has to match the exact structure that this function add book expects, right? Because you're directly passing it through. So whatever is coming in from your request, you're just passing it through to this function and then hoping that this function works, and that's the contract that you're setting, that, oh, whatever comes in from the front end is going to be set, is going to match whatever the database function expects. But that may not always be true, given the fact that your UI can, somebody else could be maintaining the UI code and they just happen to change like, the name of some input field, and that just completely breaks everything. So usually it's a good idea to sort of convert it to like the form that you expect. So how do I put this correctly? Maybe I can edit this here and see if this works. Okay, so where was that place? So I could be something like const book is, title is request dot body dot and let's say What is the other part of the book? Maybe book title and author, right? Yeah.
Author and genre.
Gotcha. Let's just assume that these just two for now. So the reason why I'm saying this is if there were some additional properties coming in that your backend database function did not support, then this may break, right? You may get like, there were more properties that it expected, and it doesn't know what to do with those. So this is sort of ensuring that whatever you send in, like if it always sort of converts it into the structure that this expects here, and then this would just be book here.
But isn't there a possibility that later a change in the model could turn title, for example, into an array of titles in different languages or something? And if it does that, then you're going to crash anyway.
Did you say the title could be changed into an array?
Yeah, if the schema were to change so the title became an array or author, then like an array, first name, last name, or whatever, then that would, even though you're doing this, you're still vulnerable.
For sure. But at least you're preventing certain kinds of bugs. Like if you change something, you got to fix, or sort of, you got to like solve for the ramifications of the change, right?
Right.
So that needs to happen anyway. But this is more of like some sort of a defense mechanism for cases where, since the data is coming from an external source, you still want things to work when even when the data isn't this, the data exists, but it just there may be some extra data in there.
Right.
Cool. That was a good question. Thank you, Jonathan. So that was the admin. So Ryan, did you have anything specific you wanted to get reviewed?
Not off the top of my head, nothing I can think of in particular. Most of my problems are things I know I just need to spend more time looking up and reading documentation. Just stupid bugs in different spots.
Gotcha. Okay, so also I would advise you to, I don't know if you were there for yesterday's talk, but I don't know if it was yesterday, but moving this into a models folder, rather having a separate folder called models, and then just importing that or requiring that in your controllers, and your database becomes an implementation detail for your for the model.
All right, can do.
If that doesn't make sense, ask somebody who knows, who understands that, and I'm sure there are a lot of people on this team who understand that. Okay. So another thing is, so have you looked at RESTful routing?
A little bit, but maybe I didn't get as much out of it as what I probably should have. What I miss here?
Gotcha. So there's conventions on how to name your routes based on what your resource is. So there's a term called resource in RESTful routing, which is analogous to the model or domain, entity. All these are sort of analogous. So the resource here is a book, right? So I'm operating on a book. So based on the kinds of operations I'm doing, the routes, there's a standard naming convention for those routes. So if I'm editing a route, editing a book, then the corresponding route would be plural name of the resource / the ID of the book / edit, or maybe it's the other way around. I exactly forget, but always look at RESTful routing and make sure your RESTful routing conventions are satisfied. I think Spencer shared this really good link which auto-generated the routes if you give it a resource. So if you give it like a book, it will automatically tell you all the routes for the book. It should be in the phase 3 history and just ping Spencer, and I'm sure he can share it with you. And that's like a super cool way to just like be like, oh, do my routes match the RESTful convention? And from the looks of it, yours do not, Ryan, which is why I'm pointing it out. For example, like your put route would not have an edit on it. It would just be this. And there would be a plural here. So this would be like, because your method would signify what operation is going to happen on the resource. Since it's a put, it's more like it's updating the resource. If it's a post, it means I'm going to be creating a resource. And if it's a delete, it means I'm going to be deleting a resource. So I don't have to specify or add extra information about the fact that I'm deleting a book in the URL. Cool. So, oops. So let's look at the schema real quick. All right, that's easy. I would add a primary key here to the ID column, just because it's good to have something which is unique. Cool, that's it. Let's do one more before we wrap up. Where was my...
Punit, I have one quick question about what you just said with RESTful routing. In the starter code we got for contacts, I thought this was strange. There was a router.get to /parameter contact ID /delete. And I thought that was weird that it was a get to delete.
Right.
Any idea why that would be what the starter code they gave us?
Yeah, I think that the project was written by somebody who did not know that method override existed. Yeah, has everyone used method override?
No, I don't think I have.
Okay, so method override is a node package that you can use that helps you like make put, delete and like post, not post, put and delete basically, essentially those HTTP requests using regular HTTP requests, because so regular form only supports a get and a post request, which is why you cannot like make a put and a delete request from a form, right? But you can specify like you can use this package and specify like a query parameter, which helps you say that, oh, I actually want to make a delete request, but still use the request would still be a post request, but then you're sending this, the secret sort of way of overriding it and saying that, no, I actually want to make a delete request, and that does it for you. So that way the right function is triggered in your express routes.
Okay, that totally makes sense. Thanks.
Yeah. So I think, I should change the context snapshot thing to like use method override, just because that would help people. Okay. So what did I want to do? I wanted to choose another one. All right, next one. Oh no. All right. Okay, so one of you, can you send me the link? You can share it on the chat. Okay. Cool. So there's some dev setup. So there's an environment.template.txt. What is this file?
This was this was going to be something that would be used to I think to generate the .env file so that the installer wouldn't have to.
But it doesn't look like it's a .env file because it has like JavaScript code in it.
No. So I think in the session you had yesterday, you said we should create a template so that the other user would know what to put into their .env file.
Mm-hmm.
And so I created a .env file. I just didn't get to finish my template.
Gotcha. So this is like work in progress.
Yeah.
Okay. So it shouldn't have a txt extension, and it can be like .env .template.
Okay.
So rename the file to that standard.
Okay.
Because it's still sort of analogous to like it should be related to .env, but it's just saying that it's a .template. So like that's kind of like the standard for whenever you have template files.
Okay, it's good to know.
Cool. So let's look at the server. Gotcha. So you're doing the same thing because of that limitation. Cool. So one piece of feedback right here is don't put underscores in your names in JavaScript. Always have camel case.
Yeah, good point.
Okay, so we are having the home route, user route, and contact route. And we're using Morgan, body parser, and this thing here too. Yeah, so maybe, so this is something, so good that you folks did this. So if you notice in my previous, the previous auth thing, I was mentioning of how it's good that there's only one sort of initialization of the routes, and that's good practice. So like this file shouldn't sort of leak out implementation details of my routes. Like that should be in the routes domain. That's the routes domain. Like it is in the domain of the server, right? To know what, which route is, what are the different kinds of routes in my system. So it would be better to create like a routes.index file, routes/index, and then that does all of the grouping of all of the different routes, and then you just export that, and then there's like one thing that you would do in the server file.
Yeah, great. That makes sense.
So what is process session? Oh, it's in utils. Gotcha. So it's like a middleware.
Yeah, that's the middleware.
Gotcha. So I would, instead of putting it in the utils, I would just put it in server/middlewares. Just because it's more obvious that it's a middleware. Because like right now, I don't quite know what it is. And also like the name process session doesn't really indicate what it's doing. Like what kind of processing is happening. So let's look at the function and let's see if we can find a better name. So process session. So this is calling the session user function, and I get back a user. So is this more like find by session ID?
Correct.
Gotcha. So maybe that is a better name for this function because session user doesn't explicitly tell me that it's finding a user. And then if it's there, then we call the next thing. Otherwise, what is record session?
That's putting the session into the database, into the session table in the database.
Oh, I see. So this is so you kind of like are creating your own session store.
Correct.
That's correct.
Okay, that makes sense. So why is that inside the users table, or rather the users file? Shouldn't it be inside like the sessions file? But since you're modifying a session table.
Yeah, we just didn't have one, and so I guess inertia led us to use the one that was the most the least inappropriate.
Gotcha. So is the session? So is there a sessions table at all, or is it just a users table?
Currently, this application has a session table.
Gotcha. So if you look at the schema real quick, or is it inside the DB? Yeah, correct. So, gotcha. Okay, so I would also, so if you're naming the tables, then I would try to have a mapping for the names of the tables to the file names too. Right, so if it's a session table, then I would have a sessions.js. If it's a member table, then I have a members.js. So in my DB, I would have like sessions, contacts, and members.
Good, yeah, makes sense.
Okay, so where were we? What were we looking at? I forget. Was it server? Utils. Right. Okay, so all right, so then this would just become like, db session dot record. So you don't have to specifically indicate that you're recording a session, because this would indicate that it's recording a session.
Yeah, that's much better.
Cool. So process session. I'm going back to the server file. Gotcha. Okay. So let's look at the home route. Home. Cool. So does your app always have to? Does it always expect a user to exist, or like for user to be authenticated?
No, if there is no findable user, then it redirects the user from whatever URL the user is asked to the home page. If the request was different from the home page.
Gotcha. But then if this is the home page, but it's expecting the user to exist on the session.
I think it's asking whether the user exists.
Right. So if it does exist, only then does it. Oh, then it redirects. Gotcha. Otherwise, it renders the home page. Okay. Cool. And so the home page has the login and all of that.
Correct.
The login and the sign up.
Gotcha. Okay, so this is the sign up and the login stuff in here. So usually, like a good, like I was saying with the other review too, to like if this is either like session, right? Like this is like or authentication is like I feel like that's like a better name than users because it's indicating like what kinds of operations are happening in there. So the same feedback about this not being like should be camel case here, and also like abstracting this and putting it in. It shouldn't be here. Like there should be some sort of an abstraction which says, make me a password.
Right.
Okay, so this is router.get. Gotcha. So if you go to the login page and if you're already authenticated, then do this. So I guess I didn't mention this in the previous code review, but if we are constantly using request.session.user and assuming that this is the source of truth for a user to exist, then it's a good idea to abstract this into a function, right? And have a function which says like, which basically like returns this value. Because what I'm saying is like, so tomorrow, if you decide to say, oh, I actually want to change and not put user and I want to say like is authenticated or something, now I have to go like in all the places where I'm using request.session.user and change it. Right? Instead, if I had like an abstraction again, so always think of abstractions, right? Like if I had an abstraction of like, is the user or is the request authenticated, then and that returns a true or false. So that way I could, it's kind of like don't repeat yourself, like keeping that in mind. Did that make sense?
We actually did that partly in the is logged in function, but we couldn't use that on home and login because on home it would do an infinite redirect loop.
Gotcha. So where is the is logged in function?
It's in the utils.js file.
Utils, okay. Right, so because is logged in is checking, is redirecting to slash, and then slash is also checking if user, and then redirecting to home. Right, was that what it was?
That's exactly right. So we couldn't use that function on the home route, and we also couldn't use it on the login route because you don't want the login page to redirect people back to the home page, and then they try to go to the login page and get redirected back to the home page.
So I guess this is where a middleware is useful. So you could have a middleware which just checks to see if the user is logged in, right? So all your requests which you want authenticated come below this middleware. And all the requests and all the routes, sorry, not requests, all the routes that come that you want authenticated come below this middleware, and all the routes that you don't want to be authenticated can come above this middleware.
Yeah, right. So the middleware itself would not do the redirection.
Right, it would just do the next. Well, actually, no, the middleware would do the redirect. So in the case of like you're not being authenticated, right? So the middleware would do something like if request.user. So this would technically be a middleware. If request.session.user, then you just call next. Otherwise, you render your login page or something, or sign up page based on what you want to do.
Right. It's just that if that middleware is checking, then you want to do that also on the login page itself, on the home page itself, and therefore you can't use the middleware if the middleware is going to redirect to the home page.
Right, which is why I suggest the home page to be above the middleware.
No, okay, but the home page still has to do the same work that the middleware is doing.
Why? Because isn't the home page something that is viewable by everybody?
No, at least the way we designed it, if you ask for the home page but you are logged in, there's no point going to the home page, and therefore you go directly to the contacts page. So the idea was if somebody has recently been using the site, comes back and asks just for the root URL, they might as well go to the contacts page where there's something they can actually do.
Right. So there has to be one route, which is the place that you redirect to when a user isn't authenticated. And that's usually the login page. Right. So if I try to access a page where I expect the user to be logged in, then I just say, oh, you're not logged in, so you go to the login page. Right. So if you follow that strategy, then whatever happens, the user will always would be redirected to the login page when they are unauthenticated.
But if they're asking for the login page, you don't want to redirect them to the login page.
Right. So the login page lives above this middleware, so it wouldn't get triggered.
But right, the middleware doesn't get triggered, but then you have to duplicate its checking functionality in the login route.
I would. Oh, so you're saying if you're already logged in?
That's right. Already logged in, so you send them to contacts.
Gotcha.
So that's why in those two places we duplicated request.session.user instead of calling the function.
Gotcha. Okay, that makes sense now. Okay, so then I would still like, okay, I guess that makes sense. It's just like two places where you're doing that. Cool, so let's look at contacts. So you're calling this is logged in everywhere here?
Yep.
Okay. And these routes are not authenticated. So you can create a contact, but you can't get the contact. Like you have to be, or did you miss it out here?
That's a good
Jonathan?
question. That's a good question.
It's a question.
Right. I thought we had tested it and found that if you weren't, and not only logged in, but an admin user, you could not. You got an error message saying you're not authorized.
Right.
So,
So I think that's why it's kind of, I would say like there's less to worry about when you make this a middleware and just like attach it in a place above this beginning of the file.
right.
Yep.
So that will just apply to all of the routes below. And then I think the name is logged in. Doesn't tell me what is happening. Like I feel like an ensure logged in is probably better. Right? Like it is logged in is probably just a Boolean. Right? Like it doesn't tell me like it's going to do something different if the user is not logged in. See what I mean?
That's true. If it redirects, then it's more than just returning a fact.
Right. Okay, so you're using so you're creating this object because you're using all of these properties in your view.
Yep.
Gotcha. So what is admin here? So why are you returning admin here?
Whether the user is an admin user and therefore authorized to create new contacts. And
Gotcha. So you show the link based on that. Cool. So was there anything specific you wanted to get code reviewed?
Let's see. I think you've covered mostly what we were thinking about. It was somewhat confusing. The outline of the directories was confusing, at least to me, because we were dealing with not the one you recommended, but what we were dealing with. What had a public directory and then two directories inside, and then a server directory, but the server file was outside of it. So basically, we ran out of time before we tackled the problem of rationalizing the entire organization and integrating the part that was already there with the part that we had added.
Okay. Yeah, I just want to quickly check one thing. It was how you were creating a user. So, because I remember seeing these promises here. So what is going on here?
So,
go ahead.
We're making a query to get the login information that would give us information about the admin status and get the user ID.
Mm-hmm.
And that would allow us to figure out the permissions. Was this for the login? Yeah.
This is for the login page, yeah.
Yeah, this is for submitting the login form.
Uh,
And after the login form is submitted, the user is going to be taken to the contacts page, where the contacts are going to be displayed, so the contacts are retrieved.
so yeah, so they need, yeah.
Gotcha. And another thing that I'm seeing, which is like a red flag, is like, don't use synchronous functions if they're in the middle of, like, if they're not like initialization. Because what's going to happen is if like multiple people log in to your page, it's going to like stall your program, because this is a synchronous function and this may take some time. Nothing else can happen until this function finishes. Instead,
Right.
bcrypt gives you a compare function, which is without the sync, and that is a promise. So you can then just like resolve it.
Makes sense.
Yeah, good.
So what is this return empty string here? Like who is this getting returned to? Like you're returning out of and what is give report? Where is that defined?
The
Report.
give report is, I think, defined up at the top just because it's used
Gotcha.
multiple times.
I see. So instead of, so I guess you can just inline this. Oh, I see. The wrong report was a username or password was invalid. Okay. That makes sense.
Yeah, the idea was that in our initial implementation, which turned out to be the only one we've done so far, the error message saying your username or password was invalid appears on a brand new page instead of being inserted. And so give report allows for changing the way in which the report is the error message is delivered in only one place.
Gotcha. So so you're just returning back a string saying that the username or password was missing?
That's currently we're returning a page that has that and only that on it.
Okay. So why is there a contacts promise here? Why do we need the contacts?
Because you're going to send the person to the contacts page and it's going to display the contacts as soon as the login.
But that's just going to redirect to the contacts page, and the contacts page is going to fetch the contacts, right? Why is it the responsibility of this thing to fetch the contacts?
That's a good question. If the contacts page were going to do it, that would be an error because then we'd be doing the same thing twice.
Yeah, I don't think this should be here. Like because this is getting lost. The moment you redirect, you're not even looking at value array of 1, right? Like that's the actual contacts coming back. You're just looking at value array of 0, which is the user. And value array of 1 is just lost, and you're just redirecting.
Oh, so it disappears. That's right. Yeah, that's just wrong.
Okay, that's good stuff.
Yeah, the contacts page gets the contacts, so that's a mistake, and that should definitely be.
Right, so then you don't even have to use promise.all. You can just do db.get login user.
Exactly.
Right. Directly.
Yep.
This will simplify a bit. Okay. And then let's look at the sign up real quick. Probably the same thing here too. You don't need the contacts here.
Yeah.
So I see. So you have like password confirmation, like you have two password fields.
Yep.
Correct.
Gotcha. So instead of calling it password 1 and password 2, I would call it like password and password confirmation.
Yep.
Else we create a new user, set the session. Okay, that's fine. Like you can just, I don't think you need the return here, because if it enters this if block and you do a response.send and it exits the if block, it's not going to enter the else and it's going to exit the function. And
So when would you use response.end?
when would you use it?
Yeah. Would that be a time we could use it?
I personally haven't used it anytime.
Okay.
I would imagine that when you just want to end and not allow any other response, you want to stop modifying the response, but then you just don't want to send it yet. You just want to like hold it or like do some other stuff.
Okay.
Yeah. Because like response.end is called under the hood when you say response.send.
Okay.
Like here, this is a good return use because you want to exit immediately and you don't want to go down here, right? So you want to kind of return. But in this situation, you don't really need, this return isn't necessary because that is the last statement in the function. Like if it gets into this if, that means it's just going to end.
Yep.
Right? It's just not going to do anything else after that because there's nothing more to do. Cool. Did anyone have any more questions? Want to talk about something?
So for temporarily, we were in some places using response.render, and it seemed to be fine as long as you were rendering the page that was asked for. But if you were going to be, in fact, seeing a different page and you use render, then the URL in the address bar of the browser wouldn't change. So for those, we redirect.
Yeah. And in cases where you want to render a message, like you should check out, like you essentially want to like send a flash message, right? Saying that, oh, that username is already registered, kind of like what happens with like other websites.
Right.
There is a package that I think Doug and Danielle, did you both use that package? Because I saw that you were using message in your code.
I don't think there was a specific package we used.
Gotcha. So you were just like rendering the message by yourself. Yeah,
we just sort of used it in the EJS template.
Gotcha. So yeah, so you could do something like that too, where you just you call response.render and you render the same page, which is like the sign up page, but then you add a message there saying that that the username is already taken.
Right. Yeah, that was our ultimate plan.
Okay, cool. If nobody has any more questions, then let's I call it an evening.
All right. Thanks very much, everyone.
All right. Thanks, folks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Punit.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
Bye.